Hey everybody, JP here. Got my Phil's Coffee Mission Cold Brew is what it's called. It's a pour-over coffee that Phil's, and that's what they actually specialize in, is pour-over coffees. Fantastic coffee joint to check out. They started in Northern California. They're in Southern California. They may be in other parts, but if you ever get a chance, check out Phil's Coffee. I think you'll love it. They've got some great baked goods too. They're just overall a great joint. So I wanted to take the time today to do a quick introduction. So appreciative of David Ronca's time. He's a seasoned veteran in the video industry, has done a lot of things, has a terrific knowledge and a handle on the industry, perspective. David's actually working on a specification, and that's actually what he's going to jump into today and actually do a presentation that he's given regarding what we call AV1. These are encoding specifications that we use in the video streaming industry, so if you're new, that we use to kind of create a bit more efficient way of streaming. These are various platforms that use it, as well as encoders and software encoders and hardware encoders that you've heard me mention before. But David kind of goes into that and talks about the differences of streaming standards and things that we're using today to create more efficiency, better quality levels of streaming, especially as things have grown over 2020 and a lot has changed this year especially, and we go into 2021. These are important factors to consider. And so if you're new and you're new to the streaming space, welcome to the channel. I want to thank you for visiting. Hit subscribe. If you're returning, thank you again. Grateful to have you back. And if you like this video, hit the like button and ring that bell to get notified when I do post a video where we talked about connecting, streaming, and delivering in regards to live streaming, technologies that relate to live streaming, as well as some other conversations with creators and various individuals on this channel. So David kind of goes into the specification, as I mentioned. He's also a lover of fine coffee and shares a little bit of a great anecdote little story you'll find in his presentation as he begins. Shares about himself, his industry experience, where he's at today. And so I think you're going to get a lot of value out of this conversation. Even if it goes over your head just a little bit, don't stress about it. It's going to be fine, right? Because if you look at it just overall theory and understanding what we're talking about, what we're really trying to drive towards is, think of it in the back of your mind, of efficiency, quality levels, the overall experience. And when it comes to streaming, as much as that's grown, there are more efficient ways to deliver that content via the internet stratosphere, right? And working with various providers, whether you're streaming on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch, or another platform, right? Content delivery networks like Limelight Networks, where I just recently did an interview with Steve Miller-Jones. So I encourage you to take a look at this video. If it's helpful, let me know, because I want to make sure that these videos are helpful and educational, informative. If you could leave me 2 things out of this conversation that were helpful for you, let me know what that would be, right? Because I think at the end of the day that we're collaborating with each other, even though it's virtually or through these sessions that I do with other individuals and experts in the industry, as well as those that are contributing to the online space, and that we can learn from each other as well as we go into 2021 as things change, improve, make it better, more efficient, hopefully reduce the complexity, if you will, of the technology that we have, that we're using. And as many tools that are out there today, I think there's a lot of choices to be made, right? But as we go into 2021, I think we want to be thinking about how do we create a better workflow, some standards and ways we approach things. David kind of goes into that. So, and there's a Q&A at the end that David and I kind of have a little bit of a question and answer session at the end. I ask some questions. So thank you. Stay safe. Stay well. Talk to you soon.
Hey, John, how's it going?
All right. Welcome to the session. David's going to kind of go into a presentation about kind of the area of David, if you will, in terms of the codec and the AV1 and the specifications you've been kind of working on a little bit, correct?
Yeah, I've actually been working with generations of codecs going all the way back into the early 2000s. So starting with MPEG-2, H.264, HEVC or H.265, VP9, and AV1.
Okay, Terrific. So you can see David's got a wealth of experience. So David, I'll go switch into presentation mode and just let you have the floor and let you jump into it. And you can do and David will do an introduction, kind of give you a background of who he is and his experience. So we'll switch right over. There we go.
Excellent. Well, hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and share some of the work I've done and some of my thoughts in the trends in the streaming industry. First of all, a little bit of background. I've got 30 years in multimedia, starting in voice and telephony. The last 20 I've been at InterVideo. I've been in video, starting at InterVideo. For anybody who's old enough to remember WinDVD, that was our flagship product. I joined Netflix in 2007, just as the work was being done to build out the streaming ecosystem. And with the video skills I had obtained at InterVideo, I was actually able to drive the encoding side of Netflix build out, the workflows, the video encoding workflows, and actually brought a lot of innovations into the industry, VMAF, convex hull encoding. Some of these I'll talk about today. And what I'm most proud of, you see that picture of me holding that's a technical Emmy. And Netflix was awarded that Emmy for the work that we did for global subtitle standardization. And I actually was the driver for that effort. And we were able to successfully get a single standard that covers all the languages in the world for subtitles. In my current role, I'm a director of video processing at Facebook, focused on the video infrastructure that for most of Facebook's video products. And as you might guess, the scale there is very, very large. And so the biggest work we have is reducing the complexity, cost, and power requirements of video compression. And I'm actually going to talk about this in my presentation. Just a couple fun facts. In the late 90s, I studied flamenco guitar with the retired Andalusian master, Mariano Cordoba. Now, I wasn't very successful in mastering that difficult technique of guitar, but it was really a great time just spending an hour a week with this man who had grown up during the war-torn years of Spain, and as a boy, just putting everything into guitar. Every week was lessons, lectures, and great stories. Anyway, I spent 5 years out of high school working on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. It was before I went to college. It was a very interesting a bit of work, very different than what I do now. And I will claim that I was successful because I do have 10 fingers and all my teeth, which is quite an accomplishment after 5 years on the rigs. Finally, I'm a wine connoisseur and a certified coffee snob. Now you think coffee snob, what does this mean? Well, I roast my own beans. Picture is missing there. And this second picture is me at an airport brewing coffee with my home roasted beans. This picture is actually at a job interview. It wasn't Facebook, I confess, it was Amazon. And when everybody left the room, I grabbed my beans, ground them real quick, and made myself a cup of brew. And finally, this was my daughter's, we took her to her college tour, and I was out in the parking lot grinding and roasting my coffee, brewing my coffee. And so she posted this on Instagram of just how bad her dad really was. And then to top it off, the local university, they were doing some research on the travel habits of executives, and they reached out to me, and it was supposed to be about travel, but once they learned about my coffee problem, they decided that for the biggest part of their talk was about how somebody would go to such extremes to have a fresh cup of coffee. And so I was actually the topic of a bit of university research. Anyway, so enough of that. Today I'm going to talk about encoding, particularly in the world of streaming. And you think of live streaming or VOD, and adaptive bitrate encoding, which is a modern technique for managing variance in network throughput. So I'm going to talk about the convex hull encoding model that we developed at Netflix and that now the world has adopted. I'm going to talk about the problem of encoder complexity, why we need royalty-free codecs, why we need the Alliance for Open Media, I'll give a quick look at SVT AV1, which is the flagship open source AV1 encoder. Talk a little bit about AV1 decoder forecasts, and then finally, because we're just kicking off work on AV2, we'll talk a little bit about what a successful AV2 project might look like. Finally, I just want to mention that this is my own personal thoughts, and I'm not actually sharing any position or information specific to either Facebook or Netflix. So let's talk about convex Hall encoding. So in the early days of streaming at Netflix, as most companies, we did fixed bitrate ladders, right? And this is adaptive bitrate where you want to start out with low resolution, low bitrate, and then you have a set of encodes going all the way up to 1080p, for example, or more recently 4K. Now in the old days, we simply said for 360p, we'll do 250 kilobits or whatever. And we had this ladder, and it kind of worked okay. The problem was most videos were actually, it was overkill. And for some videos, we needed more bits. And so we decided to take a new approach, and that's looking at each video individually. In the older days, in the 90s, a video compressionist would have sat at their workstation and made decisions for a movie that they were trying to compress for DVD to try to get the optimal output. For a automated system, you don't have that person. It doesn't scale. We had to do this in an automated way. So there was a premise that we worked on, a few actually. First of all, when you're picking your encoder recipe, you usually use a quant parameter, which is a measure of quality. And for reference, lower values of QP are higher qualities, higher bit rates. Higher values would be lower quality, lower bit rates. So within the range, for example, H.264, I think is 0 to 63, there's really actually a narrow band that would really be useful. And why is this? Let's think about it. If I have a 1080p video I'm trying to encode, and I'm at a QP that's giving me too many bits, I start raising the QP to lower the bit rate. There's a point where the quality degrades such that it would be smarter to go to 720p and decrease the QP and raise the quality and actually hold that same bit rate. So the fact is that you have to make these decisions, and you make these decisions on a per title basis. So what we did at Netflix, and again, we're talking about titles, but we actually did this at the shot level, is we would sample the video at multiple QPs per resolution. And then we would look at those. We build a graph. The graph looks like this picture over on the right, where you have like a few resolutions. And if you plot the bit rate versus quality, you get these curves. And then what we want to use is the convex hull of this graph. And what that means is we want to stay at points as far left as possible. And so this is what we end up with. And if you think about it, looking at this low resolution, let's just say this is 360p, and I have a 720p, it makes no sense to be doing encoding in that blue area underneath the red curve, because you would actually get better quality using 720p at the same bit rate, or equivalent quality at a significantly lower bit rate. So this is why we want to encode the convex hull. When we do this, it can be mathematically proven that this is the optimal bit rate for any given title. And you do this with a spacing of what we call a just noticeable difference, or 1 JND. And what does this mean? This means if you showed the video, 2 video clips, the exact same clip at 2 quality levels to 100 people, at least 75% would say clip A was better than clip B. That means clip A has a JND. So you gradually increase the quality until you get that point. 50-50 would mean that they're roughly equivalent. When you get a 75-25 split in human perception, that's telling you you've hit roughly 1 JND of spacing, which means each new bit rate you introduce is actually going to bring value to the viewing experience. Anyway, as I said, this is mathematically proven to give the optimal AVR ladder, and it works for any codec, be it X264, 265, VP9, or AV1. However, it comes at a considerable cost. Because we're doing all these pre-sample encodes before we do the final, it comes at roughly 6x complexity versus a 2-pass encode, which was the way we would have done this previously. So we're spending compute, we're buying compression efficiency. And We did this, like the goal we set at Netflix was that we picked a value of 200 kilobits. We said, okay, in some country, a user is going to be watching Netflix on their mobile device, and their connectivity may only have 200 kilobits per second. We need to deliver a good experience to this person. So we picked 100 kilobit video and 64 kilobits audio. That leaves us about 40 kilobits of padding. In using this convex hull model, we gave demos where we had encoded the entirety of the Avengers movie at 100 kilobits per second, and it looked good. Now, if you watched it on your 4K TV, maybe you would disagree. But if you were watching on your iPhone or Android device, you would look and say, wow, this looks good. It's not perfect, but it looks quite good. It's what we call watchable. You would actually watch it, and the video is not, there are not video problems that are interfering with your ability to enjoy the movie. So that was a goal we set. We actually achieved that goal, but we paid a significant price for it. Now let's talk about encoders generationally, right? So as I mentioned, I started in the 90s. MPEG-2 was what we were using with DVD. In the early 2000s, we got 264, then we got HEVC 265, we got VP9, and now AV1 and VVC. And historically, the kind of general rule of thumb, each new generation of codec would give you a 50% efficiency gain. That's reducing the compressed bits by half at about a 10x increase in complexity. Well, this sounds good, and it actually worked quite well, but this is what it looks like on a graph. And that 10x generation over generation eventually goes vertical. And so looking at this graph, you can see where the VVC and AV1 are, where we're already, the world's kind of looking at these codecs and say, wow, they're slow. And then I would say, yeah, let's multiply that by 10, right? What took you 3 weeks is now going to take you 30, right? Multiply by 100, 2 generations. What took you 3 weeks is going to take you 300 weeks. I mean, who's going to sit around for 3 years waiting for a video to encode? And then think about the 6x multiplier on convex hull. So we end up with this complexity problem that actually is becoming very serious. And it's not just a challenge for wall clock time, it's also an environmental problem. Because the cost, right, we're running compute, we're running CPUs hard, driving them 100%, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of CPUs encoding video around the world. In 2019, global data centers were projected to consume about 3% of global power. They're projecting this to be 20% in 2025, and one of the single largest sources of pollution in the world. Think about that. All right, this is what video is doing to the world. Now, I love video. We've brought a lot of great value and excitement to the world, but the other side of this, the dark side, is that, hey, we are sucking down more and more and more power in order to try to keep up, and we have to get better at this. And so computational complexity now is becoming a big problem that the industry has to solve. I want to talk a little bit about the Alliance for Open Media. And I'm going to start by telling a little story from my own personal experience. So in 2013, the HEVC spec, or H265, was published. And this was exciting for the industry. I mean, we were excited, right? Because we got great new features with HEVC. We got 4K, right? Which technically you could do with 264, but it wasn't as practical. We got 4K video, we got high dynamic range, we got 10-bit color, right? All these great features and a 50% reduction in bits. So this was a great reason to be excited about HEVC, and we were. And so my team leaned heavily into 4K and HEVC, and a year later, in February of 2014, we released season 2, A House of Cards, in 4K using HEVC. And this was just, we're so happy with his work, and we were so excited about everything we were going to do with HEVC. But then there was a bit of a problem that came in. See, when HEVC came out, the terms, the licensing and royalty terms had never really been discussed, but it was a, hey, go with the codec. It's a great codec. Trust us, we'll get this, and then you'll know. So we all went out having no idea really what it was going to cost. Well, with 264, there was a single licensing entity, MPEG-LA, and you paid your royalties through MPEG-LA, and the structures were set, and you could understand what it was going to cost you with H.264. This did not happen with 265. In fact, the IP holders for the codec split, and we ended up with three separate patent pools: MPEG-LA, HEVC Advanced, and the third one, whose name escapes me at the moment, but it was led by Qualcomm, plus a large set of companies that were not part of any of these pools. They decided they would go individually negotiate with companies. So this was like this. The HEVC bubble got popped. And in 2015, the brakes were thrown on in the industry. The streaming industry said, whoa, 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 whoa. And it just really brought HEVC deployment to a screeching halt. And in spite of the fact that the decoders were going into devices, more and more devices, on the delivery side, the VOD, if you look at the streaming, not a lot of HEVC. HEVC is being delivered for narrow use cases, 4K, high dynamic range. But by and large, the industry is stuck with 264 because of this cloud of uncertainty. So the problem we have is that the current codec landscape is confusing with regards to licensing and royalties. They don't have clear licensing. In fact, with HEVC, here we are, almost 8 years after the spec was out, and there still is no clarity on the royalty for using HEVC. And as I mentioned, that threw the brakes on adoption, right? The streaming industry kind of stopped and really slowed down and just carved out like narrow use cases. So HEVC, which I'm going to show in just a couple slides, is a phenomenal codec, but the adoption has been hindered. And even worse, there's no evidence, in spite of all the problems with HEVC and the general understanding that the royalty confusion has really hindered a promising codec. There's no evidence that the situation has or will improve with the next generation of royalty-bearing codecs, such as VVC. Now let's just think about this in terms of the web. So imagine you're a company and let's go back 10 years, even now, and you're just a brand new small startup and you're building some web technology, some service, I don't know, it doesn't have to be video, it could be anything, right? It could be, apartments or Uber or something, but you're a small upstart, you just got a little bit of money, you're doing this at home, you build your website and you launch it. And when it launches, you have no idea how much you're going to have to pay in royalties in order for that website. And every time you add a new feature, you probably have to have lawyers tell you, hey, if you do this, it's going to cost this. If you do this, it's going to cost that. And in fact, it wouldn't even be one company. It could be 20 or 100 companies. And half of your business is going to be trying to manage and understand the royalty minefield for just web technology. Well, this is absurd, right? Because the web has not been done this way. In fact, for 30 years, the web has been built on a model of collaborative, open, and royalty-free development. Many, many, many companies have worked together for standards. They've built open source tools, and this is all shared under the principle that a rising ocean lifts all boats, right? And so the web has been phenomenally successful, I would argue primarily because of this collaborative, open, and royalty-free model. You can develop your web technology, and you don't have to worry about this minefield of lawyers and royalties. Now, I would argue that video is an essential part of the modern web ecosystem, and so the proven open web model of shared development and royalty-free licensing is where video needs to be, and it is the best model. And with that, AOM was founded, and it was founded on the hypothesis that the need for royalty-free video in the web ecosystem was so important that companies would be willing to commit time, talent, and treasure to develop these codec and continue this technology moving forward. And AV1 is actually proving the AOM hypothesis to be true. So let's take a look at AV1. Now this graph was work that was done by Intel. It's a codec comparison. And Intel shared this at SPIE this year. And there's some interesting work. First of all, Intel took a different approach. If you look at codec comparison studies of the past, the x-axis is always bits, right? Your bit rate. And the y-axis is your absolute quality, right? And in that graph, you can see that a codec can save you bits, but you never know what it's going to cost you. Now, Intel did this codec comparison using a different model. In this one, the x-axis is the encoding time in seconds. First of all the encodes were done single-threaded, removing all threading optimization. And the x-axis is the encoding time in seconds, and the y-axis is relative efficiency. So you're comparing them to each other. And this gives us an interesting view of all the generations of codecs that we're all used to working with. So let's take a look at a few things that this graph tells us. First of all, if you look at X265 and X264, you can see as planned, we actually get a 50% efficiency gain at a 10x cost, a computational complexity cost, right? But what we also get, which nobody really talks about, is equivalent efficiency as X264 at 1/10 of the complexity. Now this is key because this shows that there's two aspects to a video codec that matter: compression efficiency and computational efficiency. And you can see from this graph that HEVC is both compression efficient and computationally efficient. As I said a few slides earlier, this was a darn good codec, and it's a shame that the brakes were put on the deployment of such a solid technical achievement. Anyway, so let's take this approach and take a look at AV1. And the first thing we can see now is that versus X265, and we're using SVT AV1, which is an open source codec built by Netflix and Intel, we can see that we get at the high end a 28% efficiency gain at a 5x complexity. So this is a little more than half of the gain that we got with HEVC versus AVC, but it also only comes at half of the complexity. So I think this is a reasonable trade-off with AV1, which was they also had a time to market concern here. We also see that AV1 versus 265 delivers equivalent efficiency at about 1/10 the complexity. So AV1 can be demonstrated here to be both compression efficient and computationally efficient. In other words, AV1 is actually a rather good encoder. You might be looking at that little green graph out there of VP9 and saying, what's going on there? Well, I would say, so remember we talked about the convex hull encoding. Convex hull in this graph is always to the left, right? So anything that's to the right of those lines is off the convex hull. So PD4 VP9, it's good that it was royalty free, but it has some problems. It's neither compression efficient nor computationally efficient when compared to other codecs. And by the way, SVT AV1 is not finished, so it's still a work in progress. And we believe there's more opportunity to bring that computational complexity down. Now, you're always sacrificing efficiency, but if you can see, it's already approaching the complexity of X264 very slow, which is the second, the very end is placebo. So that's the second one at the bottom of 264 is very slow. And we're actually already there at about a 40% bitrate savings and continuing to push to the right. It's going to go to the right and up. And so we're hoping to continue to carry that forward. So, I mean, what it would mean is if you use AV1 software encoding with SVT in the future, you'll be able to use any speed setting from X264, match that encoding speed, but save 30 to 40% of bits. So this is huge. This is really, really huge. Now, this is an encoder. Of course, without a decoder, it doesn't matter how good this encoder is. So what's happening in the AV1 decoder world? So if you had talked to me in 2018, when AV1 was beginning to solidify, and asked me when we would see like critical mass of hardware decoders in mobile devices, which is where we really need to see it, I probably said, oh, maybe 2022, right? We figured by 2020 the chipsets would be there. They'd be at the high end. Each year the features in the high end get pushed down a generation. So by 2022, the mid phones would have all had hardware AV1. It didn't actually work this way. Chipset manufacturers, for various reasons, have slipped their hardware roadmap. So we're probably not going to see hardware introduced at any meaningful level until 2023, 2024. And what this means is that we're looking at 2026, 2027 before hardware AV1 decoders reach critical mass in the mobile market. And this is really unfortunate, but it's a reality that we have to deal with. So that pushes us then to software decoders, and we have, what can we do there? So there's currently 2 software decoders that are available. They're both open source, royalty free. That's David, not related to me, which was funded by the Alliance for Open Media and is available in GitHub. And GAV1, which is a Google decoder. They both have performance features, strengths, and they both have some weaknesses. And those are being worked on, and these decoders are going to have to fill the gap for the next few years. We're doing some work to try to improve the decoder performance of both of these, right? Both David and GAV1 to hit a good, solid performance level. Today, if you look at about half of the deployed Android phones, David would probably max out at about 360p at 60 FPS, which is not really good enough. We'd like to see 540p at 60 FPS, because 540p at 60 FPS implies 720p at 30 and 1080p possibly at 24. And so that we feel like if we can get the software decoder performance on Android devices to 540p 60 FPS, that will be a good solid win, and that would allow those software decoders to fill the gap. So our goal, actually, we're working on some performance improvements through a various means, right? There's onboard capabilities, there's GPU, there's other things that we can do. And so we're hopeful that within the next year or so, we'll be able to get a majority of Android devices. When I say majority, the newer devices, we're probably talking the last 3 years, which would be then 18, 19, 20, to be able to decode 720p 60. Since most of these phones only have a 1080 resolution or less, that would actually be very solid. You could do then 1080p 30 and possibly even go to 1440 for some of these devices. So we're actually very hopeful. We believe that there's a solid possibility to get there, and we're investing a lot of time in that over the next year. So if you track either one of these projects, you should then be seeing news over time as they're getting better and better. Finally, we're rolling out AV1, but we haven't stopped working on the next generation, and the next generation is AV2. So what would a successful AV2 look like? This is purely my thoughts. There is no agreement at this point. AOM has not set any goals around this, but I showed you that graph, and to me, this is what a successful AV2 would look like. But basically, versus AV1, we would be anywhere from 30 to 50% better compression efficiency at 5 to 10x complexity increase. We would be able to do AV1's best efficiency at 1/10, but we would carry this complexity all the way up, hopefully even into the X264 fast domain. So we would have one codec that from a complexity perspective would cover the entire gamut of use cases. You put this codec with a decoder that's capable, and you've got a very, very strong contender to basically be the one decoder or codec, to rule them all. So let's just go back and review what we talked about today. I've argued that the 10x generational increase in codec complexity is not sustainable. We've really run out of room there. We now have to think about encoder complexity. And so in the past, it was compression efficiency was the top line goal. I argue that encoder complexity needs to be another first order metric for new codecs. So you can't simply say we're going to be 50% fewer bits at 10x. You also have to say we're going to be equivalent at 1/10 or even better than that. So the next generation codecs have to focus both on low complexity encoding and high efficiency. As I've shared, the AOM hypothesis is actually proving true. There are many companies now involved in AOM, and these companies are investing time, talent, and treasure, all in the goal of moving the state of art for royalty-free video encoders forward. AV1 actually is a very good codec. I've demonstrated that with the complexity efficiency graph. And even more than that, SVT is an incredibly good implementation. In fact, it's probably one of the best engineered software encoders in the history of the industry. I know this is a big statement, but all the graph was done with single thread. You want to see the codec move, then you turn on threads, because Intel built this from the ground up so that you get a near linear performance boost with threads, which is not usually the case with software encoders. There's usually a lot of waiting, blocking, and such. And then also the AV1 decoders we talked about, just the fact that the chip industry, the chipset industry has fallen behind. And so we're going to have to work hard to make up that gap by bringing the AV1 software decoders much, much further forward in terms of computational complexity, reducing the computational complexity so that we can get a broad deployment. Thank you, everybody. It's been great today. I just appreciate you taking the time. Let me share with you. And these are my contact vectors if you're interested in reaching out if you have any questions.
Wow, David, thank you so much. That was fantastic. So there's I think, and for everybody that's will be watching this, so, as you talk about some of the, the challenges you were mentioning about the, from a decoder perspective, we talk about the hardware, we talk about the software. Do you foresee any type of fruition of where other types of devices outside of the mobile type device framework, and I'm thinking of the set-top TV boxes or web players or any other specifications that would provide some additional decoding functionality at a software or hardware level?
Yeah, so what I didn't talk about was why. That might be a question. Why are the hardware decoders delayed? And the reason is that the reference hardware IP that was provided by AOM was not really optimized, and the cost to deploy that in hardware would have been excessive. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're building 4K TVs, your margins are quite high, and maybe that cost is not an issue. Mm-hmm. When you're deploying Android phones for free or for $50 or whatever, the cost is critical. And so the vendors simply made the decision that they would have to redo this from the ground up mm-hmm. in order to make that hardware codec cost efficient in their chip, right, in terms of transistor count. So that's unfortunate. It's a lesson learned. We'll not make that mistake in AV2. But I would expect the devices that have higher margin, I don't know because I don't have that insight anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm not directly engaging now with the display vendors, the TV vendors and such. But my expectation is, well, first of all, in laptops and personal computers, the CPU power is there, the memory, everything, the cooling is everything there, and the cost, you could do the optimized software decoding. I would expect to see, you can already get AV1 in Chrome. I would expect to see, possibly Mac. That's not clear where Apple is on this. Microsoft, they would be available on laptops, possibly some of the higher end Chromebooks and such. Getting into TVs, anywhere where the margin for hardware, where the margin could support the extra cost, where, and again, this is not my business, but I'm assuming if you're looking at like your decoder chips or your chipset for like a $2,000 TV, an extra 20 cents or 30 cents in cost to carry those transistors, or I don't know what the cost is, I just made that up, would not be an issue, right? But right. I've heard from the Android, I've actually had people on the Android side say the current Android model cannot absorb 1 penny of additional royalties or costs. Wow. They have cut, and don't quote me on this as gospel truth, but that was what was told to me by somebody else in the industry who does know. So I'm paraphrasing, but the point is, whether that's exact or not, the point is that the margins are so thin on Android phones because of the business that they just can't carry these huge costs. Anyway,
no, it
long
makes
answer
sense.
to a short question.
No, I think that's good. And I think there's just two parts of that. So to kind of tie into that more, does that include with the dramatic increase of where we're at in 2020 and the growth of online streaming and the video and the changes that we're seeing in terms of just the amount of volume, and trying to look at better compression technologies for the streams and what you're discussing and the advantages of having a more optimized type workflow, would people like Roku, Fire app, the Fire TV, those type of devices as well, be considered as part of that, like smart TVs as well, devices?
So that's a good question too. And again, I'm a little bit now decoupled from that part of the industry, so I don't.
Right.
Any insights I have are several years old. I mean, like some Google TV, the little USB devices go for $49. So and there's not a monthly subscription that a cell phone has to try to absorb some of that. So they probably have the same problem on the one hand. On the other, oftentimes the reason they are so cheap is because they don't actually do much of the work. They simply push the bytes into the TV, and you let the TV hardware through the HDMI negotiation. So when HDMI signaling, you can signal AV1, the device will say, hey, I can decode AV1. Then perhaps the Roku or somebody could say, hey, okay, here, I'm going to deliver you compressed AV1, and you can decode it. But I'm stepping out there on some pretty thin ice because I'm talking like I really know what I'm talking about, and I'm really kind of speculating.
No, that's totally fair, because I think for the audience here, I want to kind of take a step back from it. What David's kind of hitting on is, from a streaming and webcast production, this is from a live streaming platform, from my side, from an encoder, we talked about the term glass to glass. Those are mobile devices, TVs. They all act as kind of decoders, if you will. So if you think of a massive array of global, and David brought up a good point, where we know in the pandemic, with the changes with the pandemic and the amount of time people are spending on their mobile phones, we're going from 6 to 7 hours now in some of the studies, where there's a significant uptick. So this device has become, in a sense, a decoder of receiving that and then translating that live stream. So David's kind of hitting on that. And David, I think that's totally fine. I think this is kind of a broader discussion of both from an industry perspective as well as a broadcaster perspective of how we deliver our streams more efficiently as we work with the respective CDNs, Akamai, Limelight, AWS, whoever it might be, and the type of encoders we're using, whether it's software or hardware, and obviously our audience, right? And you know that as well as anybody, of we're trying to get to a point and reduce the amount of, I appreciate you're coming about the energy consumption and the green aspect of the data center. And that came up earlier this year, just the amount of activity, people are online at home, the data centers are running at full capacity. You're seeing a lot of processing going on. And so we've got to look at this long-term strategically to figure out what will be the optimal way to work towards it. It's going to, like, and to your point, it's not going to get solved overnight. It's a consistent pattern of working towards a goal to get to where we can have a more stable, more reliable platform.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think about video compression, there have three things that you would focus on. You have complexity, distortion, and compression efficiency, right? So you want to reduce the bits, you want to reduce the distortion, you want to reduce the complexity. In the CPU encoding world, you can only get two of those, right? You can reduce the bits and you can reduce the distortion, but you're going to pay the price, as I mentioned with convex Hall encoding, of increased complexity. Or you can reduce, you can reduce the complexity and you can reduce the bits, but you're going to pay a price of rising distortion. So it's kind of, we're in that trade-off world right now that you can't get everything. And unfortunately, in the world of COVID, with this massive uptick in streaming video, whether it's live or VOD and video engagements, egress, the bytes that are moving, the bits that are moving across the networks through countries are becoming a problem. The countries are beginning to get saturated networks. And so all of a sudden, we're actually being asked as an industry to fix all three of those at the same time. We need we can't keep up with the growth in video. So we have to reduce the compute because you can't grow the data centers fast enough, especially in this COVID lockdown world.
Right.
And by the way, the users are spending all this time on front of their video, so you can't deliver pixelated video. Oh, and by the way, the country's networks are saturated, so you have to reduce the bits. And so this is the world we live in, and it's kind of, And the truth of the matter is, and this would be a deeper conversation today, but we're actually, I'm of the opinion that for the large set of video use cases, the age of all the cloud encoding, the age of CPU compression is going to pass. And we're going to move into the age of specialized ASIC, because the density, the compression density we need to get, the quality we need to get for CPUs, literally we would be building, data centers would take over the planet. So we're really working hard. This is the problem. This is what keeps me up at night, right? Because I'm being asked to get all three of those points on that triangle all at the same time, and nobody wants to compromise on any of it.
No, that's absolutely true. And you're right. It is a deeper level conversation. I won't even go into the fact in terms of a previous role I had where we talk about where you're seeing now where people like Microsoft and others are now putting data centers in the water, right, in Ireland, and testing out different concept scenarios, different ways we can achieve efficiency in terms of compute. But we're faced with different challenges and complexities that are going to take time to work through. So absolutely. Wow. I could go on here, but
I have one more point to make. So you saw that curve, right? You understand from my talk how video is pushing on the limits of data centers. Remember, there's another side to this, and that's all the machine learning, both regular machine and video understanding. Think about all the CPU power that's being burned trying to look at video, like the feeds coming in from your doorbell camera, trying to decide, hey, I need to alert you. So you've got data centers. Not only is video, and we're the video industry, this is what we're doing. Not only are we spending huge amounts of compute to compress the video, we're spending double that to analyze the video and try to understand what's happening in it. And they're both growing this phenomenal rate. So it's like, okay, at some point we've got to figure this out. And again, that's kind of it. It's when I left Netflix, I felt like I wanted to do one more big thing. And I realized that the great work we did in the last decade was great for the streaming business and for customers, but now we got to go and clean up we kind of got to clean up the mess we made. And so I thought that this is an exciting problem. This is an exciting bookend, right, for my career, right, before I think about slowing down. So.
No, absolutely. I think this is apart from a technology perspective. To your point, David, I absolutely agree. It's a new stage of innovation, and we're really trying to tackle. You're hitting a very. I appreciate where you're coming from when you say what keeps you up at night, or this is keeping you up, because there's a lot of involvement, a lot of research, a lot of trying to validate, and trying to work and coordinate, and collaborate with many in the industry. And these are a lot of different people are involved in the process. And that's a process that takes time. But thank you for your efforts and what you're doing on that, and for taking the time today to kind of share about this, go through the presentation. If people want to kind of maybe follow up, and is there something publicly available that they could follow along in terms of this development to go to?
Well, the good thing is most of these companies, Amazon, Twitch, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Netflix, right, are very public in tech blogs and talks and videos. Some are some are like academic with papers. Others are like at scale or MUX, where they're really kind of more focused on practical use cases. But so there's a whole bunch of publicly available information, talks, videos. I've got a few on my LinkedIn account. If anybody links with me, you can watch my videos. But there's others that are available. Like if you go, for example, techblogs.netflix.com, you can find in all those tech blogs, you'll find a whole minefield, a gold mine of tech blogs around the video work that's being done, both compression, quality metrics, and all that. So, and like I said, all the companies are very open. It's kind of part of that model that even it's driving the Alliance for Open Media, that we're all very open about what we're doing. We feel like video is important about our business, but we don't feel it's like the family jewels that we have to keep secret. So we're all willing to share with each other, because we want, what we're doing, because we're proud of the work and we want the industry to get better.
Well, it's always good to share the special reserve blend of coffee with everybody else, right? So
Yeah.
Okay, so I know it's a lame dad joke or whatever I just threw out there, but I'm just going to put it out there. But no, David, thank you so much. Let's try to do this again and have another conversation, because I think you bring a really good perspective. And the goal of this channel, everybody, is, as David has so graciously provided his time. This is kind of like being in a streaming university class. You're learning, I'm learning, and we're getting to hear from David. And this is important, because as we look to develop where we're going, and in terms of our productions and whatever our responsibilities may be, we are, as a community, trying to develop better ways of working together and workflows for delivering video online. So thank you, everybody, for your time today. Stay safe, stay well. Talk to you again soon.
Thanks, everybody. It's coffee time.
It's coffee time. Thanks, David. All right.